she is! A foul witch!
No one is anyone.
Begone, Witcher, and leave the witch, or we'll you too.
Shut your mouth, Reverend, or you'll taste my
The world of The Witcher is filled with interesting characters and NPCs, with even more interesting things to say.
I hate droughts.
My favorite characters, besides Siegfried, include Dandelion, or Jaskier, as he is named in the original Polish version. He is Geralt's oldest friend outside of Kaer Morhen. A troubadour by trade, his ballads are known around the world, and on first introduction you can easily dismiss him as the stereotypical comedic fantasy bard. But you learn not long after that he is so much more than that. He is a loyal and emphatic friend, and very knowledgeable, among other things. Shani is a medic, and has experienced the horrors of war firsthand during her time serving in the past war, and is at the time of the game treating plague victims in Vizima. She knows Geralt through Dandelion, and is an old friend from the books. She assisted Geralt in his quest to find his adopted daughter, and had a short affair with him. She's just a genuinely good person that just wants to help people. She's not a character that jumps out, but enjoyable either way. Kalkstein. The Alchemist.
Sorry, I got lost in thought.
What can be said about him that hasn't already been said? Well, a lot, since I've only just mentioned him. Master of Alchemy, seducer of women, honorary chairman of the Alchemists, Geomancers and Pyromancers Club, and the only man alive powerful enough to strike fear in a Witcher. There are many great characters in the game that I failed to mention, some minor and some big, but I simply don't have the time to talk about each and every one of them, since my calendar is absolutely clogged with aimlessly scrolling through my phone on my bed, so we move on. And then there's Geralt. Geralt is not what you would expect from his appearance, especially in the marketing for the game. Long white hair, brooding and filled to the brim with scars. He comes off as your typical classic dark fantasy anti-hero. But in reality, Geralt is quite literally just some guy who does pest control for a living and likes to hang out with his friends and loved ones. As a person, Geralt is very low-key and only stands out because of his profession. He is witty and sarcastic, and will more often than not let his dry humor be on full display when he isn't bugging off his Witcher potions or complaining about portals, for which he has a phobia. And lots of brooding and sulking, and at times being overly philosophical. Geralt would like to appear indifferent, but in truth he is the exact opposite. So much so in fact that in the books he made up a so-called Witcher's Code in order to convince his customers, among other things, that he isn't allowed to kill sentient and harmless monsters, when in reality plenty of other witches have done so, and Geralt just doesn't want to. Witchers are also known to stay neutral in conflicts, and though Geralt says he does, he really doesn't most of the time, because of his moral code and nature, another contrast to the world's impression of Witchers. What makes a character great, including Geralt, is that you are made to both like him, but at times also be annoyed at him, and even hate him, because like the rest of us, he is flawed and multi-layered. Geralt is a well-established character who at the time of the first game's release had 8 books of lore behind him. In most RPGs your character is whoever you want them to be, but not in The Witcher. In reality, the player is merely there to push him in whichever direction they see fit. What might sound like a limitation is actually a blessing in disguise. So many games give you all the freedom in the world to be who and to do what you want. And for many that is great. And for many not so much, including myself. With unlimited freedom, there is no purpose, and because of that, anything can be your purpose. But then, what is your purpose? Does any of it actually mean anything? What path do you choose? It's unfocused. And to me, all these options leave me more confused than anything else, and I spend more time speculating about them rather than enjoying the actual role-playing. And because these games need to adhere to so many things, a lot of it is watered down. The Witcher gives you one character and one class. No matter what you do, you will always remain as Geralt the Witcher, but with slight variations. You are a Witcher, and the entire game is built around it. instead of having to accommodate for 5 to 10 different classes. This singleness of purpose creates a very pure and focused role-playing experience. And while you aren't Geralt, you feel and are a part of him, and you don't feel less involved just because he is his own character, but the opposite. Many games have characters that are their very own, including RPGs, but none of them manage to make the player feel directly connected with the character, the world, and the story like The Witcher does. You can't have an evil playthrough, because Geralt as a person isn't evil. He's complicated, but not evil. And the game does a lot to present the player with different choices and decisions, to dilemmas where Geralt from the books would choose either. But there are character breaking ones. An example. Geralt takes up a Witcher contract about collecting dog tallow for a guy in Vizima. Problem is, Geralt has to wander around at night and kill stray dogs and collect the tallow. During the daytime, however, Geralt can't attack dogs, but nighttime is apparently character breaking time. And Geralt just goes to town, and can even kill humans as he sees fit. Geralt would never do any of this, and he most certainly would never stoop so low as to accept a contract like this. This is the guy that will purposely lie to peasants about a so-called Witcher code, so he doesn't have to kill innocent monsters or break his morality, despite losing out on a lot of money. It's certainly on purpose in order to give the player a bit more freedom, but almost all of the decisions and gameplay adhere to Geralt from the books, but not all of it. And because of that, book readers will have a fun time trying to play as canonically as possible. One thing I do to keep it as canon as possible is cockblocking Geralt's friend Triss Merigold the Sorceress every opportunity I get, just like Geralt does in the books.
We have no time to lose, Triss. The sooner we set off, the better.
You're right.
Speaking of Triss, there's a couple of questions that book fans can ask her, like why is your hair red instead of chestnut? Why don't you cover your chest like you did so prominently in the books because of your scar? By the way, what happened to your scar from Brenna? Why are you so confident around Geralt now? Also, where the fuck is yet? Basically, the devs at CD Projekt Red are cum brains who want to see badongers. Hell, they even included a sex card collecting minigame, but we're not going to talk about that. Instead, I would recommend that you engage with more moral minigames, such as gambling and bare knuckle fighting. They also made Princess Ada, the princess Geralt freed from a curse in the books, the story that also appeared in the opening cinematic of the game, not mentally handicapped after being set free from the curse, despite the books making it clear that's what happened, or likely happened to her after she became a normal human being. Again, they also gave her big naturals, and made her extremely lustful for Geralt, but I mean, who wouldn't be? But it's all good though, because the game's writers managed to get these crucial things right. The spirit, the atmosphere, the tone and the characters, and the overall writing style found in the books. And in The Witcher 1's case, namely the short story collections. They are my favorites, and Sapkowski crafted some truly masterful modern fairy tales. And that's what The Witcher 1 feels like, a fairy tale, not a fantasy epic. The story doesn't feel bigger than you or the game's characters, and it doesn't feel like you're in an epic, but instead a very close and intimate fairy tale told around a campfire. There is a moral and perspective to every story in the books, and almost every quest in the game. And like a fairy tale, it doesn't strive to be realistic, but it will always aim to communicate something true and real. Writing doesn't have to be realistic to speak the truth. The Witcher will have fun, be silly, and at times even goofy. It will be dramatic and even over-dramatic, and bittersweet, and also serious. But in the end it will always be real. I would like to compare the writing style of The Witcher to the paintings of the Impressionism movement. Impressionistic painting didn't seek to reflect the world in a realistic way, but in a way that's real. In a way where you feel like you're taking a walk by the harbor as the sun is going down. You feel the chilly air coming from the sea, while still being touched by the warmth of the last sun rays of the day. It appeals to your senses and achieves realism through its unrealism. It makes you feel like you're standing in that field through painting techniques. in the same way that The Witcher makes you feel what the characters are feeling through its unrealistic writing techniques. The way they behave, speak, express themselves aren't realistic, but real, because of what they convey to you as an audience member. Back in the day when film was just getting developed, they used expressionism to convey emotions and feelings to the audience in silent films. Back then it was merely seen as a necessity due to the limitations of the time, but today we see it as a necessity for art's sake. The Witcher 1 has many similarities and references to the books. These can be subtle, like quoting the books or making quests that closely resemble some of the individual short stories. Some are very obvious, and others not so much, unless you pay close attention, and I love it. Noticing these things feels so rewarding, and it's very obvious that despite a few mishaps here and there, CD Projekt really do care about the source material, unlike some others. Dark fantasy is a genre that The Witcher belongs to, and while it is dark, that often misleads people's expectations of the games and the books. Because the way The Witcher truly achieves its realism is in the way that it's willing to portray the darkness and brutality of life, while also showcasing the light and beauty of it as well. Often more so, and The Witcher 1 really takes note of this. The world is a dark and unforgiving place, and there is no saving it. But you're surrounded by friends, and it's all going to be alright. There is a lot of nihilism in art, especially today, and we often forget about reality and need reminders, like in The Witcher 1. It's dark fantasy, but it's also hopeful and optimistic. I mentioned how the game captures the spirit, tone and atmosphere of the books. And it does that not only through the writing, but through the music. The music is one of the most load-bearing pillars of the cathedral that is The Witcher 1's atmosphere. Without even playing the game, it takes you to a dark fairytale land populated by monsters and people, by good and evil, and everything in between, just by listening to it. The music does a great job of taking the imagery of each area and making it into sounds. You have the outskirts of Vizima that looks safe but really isn't, and has an evil lurking underneath. And the music for it communicates this perfectly. Kaer Morhen feels familiar and close to you, it being the home of the Witchers, and despite the attackers, it's one of the areas where you feel at the most peace, even more so than the Trade Quarter, but it's also bigger than you and distant with its ancient history and Geralt's amnesia, and also depending on the player's book knowledge, or lack thereof. It's peaceful but overwhelming, and you can feel the epic task ahead of you. Lakeside is out of this world, especially after everything you've experienced in the game at that point. And like you literally do in the game, it really feels like you've teleported into another world.
Fucking Witcher's fate.
Music in The Witcher 1 is so fantastical, but down to earth, like The Witcher is. My favorite thing about the soundtrack is how it doesn't really have a theme, despite maybe the menu theme, but instead a common melody that the composers masterfully wove into multiple tracks seamlessly. The soundtrack has many elements of typical fantasy soundtracks, but like The Witcher takes familiar elements from other fantasy and reshapes it into its very own, so does the soundtrack, and I can safely say that you can't mistake The Witcher's soundtrack for anything else. The Witcher 1 isn't very impressive graphically, not even for 2007, and that's very apparent in the character models, with a few exceptions. Also, this lumberjack looks like a German philosopher. Almost everybody looks like their mother drank heavily during pregnancy, which is likely the case. I mean, we are in Temeria after all.
I fucking hate it!
The reason the models look the way they do is because the devs spent most of the budget on birds. Look at that smooth animation. Now look at this motherfucker run. This also means the devs didn't have money for many different models. The monsters look great though. The low quality helps them look truly ghoulish. The environments and world is a different story from the models. It's medieval Europe, and the textures truly look like something out of the Dark Ages. But it's all done extremely well still, and it doesn't stick out. You can tell the devs really did their research in order to make all of the architecture look authentically medieval, and not fantastical, with a few exceptions, such as with the elven architecture. And if you've ever been to Poland, you will recognize a lot of the architecture seen in the game. Every area, though very reminiscent of each other, have their very own identity and feel, and the feeling you get from entering a new area is something else. The shift in the feel and atmosphere of one area to the next is very intense and instant. Traveling from Kaer Morhen to the outskirts of Vizima takes you from feeling safe and at peace to unsafe and alert. But when you teleport to Lakeside, after having dealt with so much in Vizima, you get the sense that you've stepped into a fairy tale, and that everything is going to be okay. Every nook and cranny of the game is made with such passion and care, and besides a lot of interiors feeling copy-pasted, everything else is unique and filled with details. My favorite details include the light coming from the windows, especially the stained ones in the hospital. I really love that CD Projekt made all the text you see in the game world the Glagolitic script, which is the oldest known Slavic alphabet. It's a nice touch and reference to the game's very Slavic identity and roots. The weather effects leave a lot to be desired, and while this isn't a visual detail, I really like that you can hear it raining from inside buildings. The game has so many details, they even added horse shit on the cobblestones. I don't know if I would call the sound design good, it's probably somewhere between good and bad, but it just fits and ingrains itself in your head.
Mere deduction.
From moving items in your inventory, slashing enemies and brewing potions, there's just something about the sound effects. The voice acting goes from okay to good, and it's not as bad as people say it is, but there is a lot of it that's unintentionally funny though.
Hi, Geralt.
Hi, Shani.
I miss Oxenfurt sometimes.
You could always go back.
No, I'm needed here. Few have your immunity.
I wanted to talk.
Quickly, I need to get back to work.
You can clearly hear all of this with Geralt, voiced by Doc Cockle. There are many points where Geralt's delivery is completely soulless and it makes an awkward atmosphere around some conversations. But then there will be funny delivery, and that will do a 180 on the mood. But a lot of the time Doc Cockle gets the voice and delivery just right, and it just captures you and immerses you in the story and moment. There are many good moments of this, but my favorites are when Geralt narrates a flashback or reflects on a quest he just completed and the choices he made.
A night of the Flaming Rose, soaked in stench from head to foot. I usually work alone, but this was an opportunity to see a knight in action. I must say he did rather well for a human. That was rare gratitude he showed.
This was the first time Doc Cockle played Geralt, and as I've shown, it's obvious that he was still trying to find the voice and get used to it, and I'm so glad that CD Projekt kept him as the voice throughout the entire series and let him grow with the role. Besides Geralt, I really love William Roberts' work in the game. He plays Vesemir and Kalkstein, and both performances are great. Then there's of course Wayne Forrester as Siegfried, but also Peter Marinker as Thaler, that also played Sultan Shive, Geralt's old friend. Edna Final Parker as Berengar. Overall, I really like the voice work in The Witcher. The good and the bad. The good because it's good, and the bad because it just adds a certain charm to it all. The kind that you get with a lot of B-movies. The kind where you can tell that a lot of effort went into it, but that they just weren't able to achieve it. The Witcher 1 is a very messy game, in terms of gameplay, graphics, voice acting, story, everything. There's a lot of good, even excellence, but also a lot of not so good, even bad. But in all of it you can feel the passion from the developers and their earnest attempts at creating the best role-playing game in the world, despite this being their first real video game ever, and its charm is immaculate. Making this video, I wasn't sure if I would be able to translate my thoughts in a way that I could describe my feelings towards the game, but an attempt was made, and that applies very well to The Witcher 1. An attempt was made, an attempt that would sprout into one of the best role-playing series in video game history. But looking back at the first attempt, it was a real one and a good one, and one that I will never forget.